A guy like Kobe and a guy like Steve Nash, they approach the game from a very scientific viewpoint. They believe that if they can pivot equally off of either foot, and they can dribble equally with either hand, and they can finish with either hand, then they're that much harder to stop. You know, if you can only go to the right, you just lost 50% of your options as an offensive threat. So a lot of it was just making sure that no matter where he was on the court, he could square up either with a front pivot or a reverse pivot, and he could do so off of either foot. And that once he could do that and he jab steps, he could go either direction off of a jab step. That if he could go right and then cross over to go, or go left and cross over to come back right, he could also go right, cross over to come back left. So it's all about creating those options. So it really wasn't anything magical. And then another thing about a guy like Kobe, he breaks things down into smaller parts and then adds them up. So if the end result is being able to do some type of fadeaway post-up move, first thing he does is master each little component of that and then puts everything together instead of skipping steps, which for most of us, and I'll say us because I was the same way when I was your age, I watch a player on TV do this awesome move and then I run right outside to my driveway and my basket and I try to mimic that move. Doesn't work that way. You got to go back to the basics, because if you don't build it from a strong foundation of fundamentals, then you'll never be able to do that finishing move. And you actually, when you try to skip steps, you make your foundation that much weaker. There's only one way to get to the top of a ladder. There's only one way, step by step. That's the only way you can get to the top of a ladder. Now you can fall all the way to the bottom with one misstep. So you can make one boneheaded decision in your life and you can go all the way back to zero. But the only way to get to the top is to respect every step. But if you're going to make me name two, I'll name two. One at Montrose Christian was a Japanese player named Tashi Ito, who was the point guard on KD's team. One of the toughest kids I've ever met in my entire life, physically and mentally. Like tough to the point of, I saw him get one of his front teeth knocked out during a game and he just picked it up off the ground and tossed it over to coach and just kept playing. Like he was incredibly tough. But he was also one of the best teammates that I've ever been around. You know, he cared just as much about the guy next to him as he cared about himself. And to this day, if you ask KD, who's one of his all-time favorite teammates from any team he's ever been on, I would be shocked if Tashi's not in the top 5. Then if you go on to my time at DeMatha, there was a kid named James Robinson who ended up playing at Pitt, and he plays overseas now, I believe in Turkey, and same thing. James is one of the toughest kids that I've ever met in my entire life, physically and mentally. And you know, he was a 4-year starter at DeMatha, which is almost unheard of. I mean, Victor Oladipo and Markelle Fultz weren't even 4-year varsity players, much less, you know, what James was able to do. James still to this day is the all-time winningest player at DeMatha. Now that helps because he played on varsity for 4 years, but I think he won 121 games in his 4 years to just a handful of losses. And the reason I tell you that story, and I absolutely adore James. I mean, at my business right now, I run pretty lean. I don't have a big staff of people. I've got a couple of people I work with. But if James called me right now and said, would you give me a job? I would give him a job in a split second. And then I would just make up a job for him to have because he's that good of a kid and he's that accountable. And James is not the best shooter I've ever seen. He's not the best ball handler. He's not the best rebounder. He's not the best defender. He had a very high basketball IQ, but it wasn't the highest. If you were to line up all of the attributes, I don't think he was the highest, except for arguably the toughest player I've ever met and arguably the best teammate I've ever met. And those are two things that you guys have control over. So if somebody's not out there singing your praises that you're the best teammate that they've ever had, or you're the most infectious energy giver, that's on you. That's 100% up to you whether or not you do that.